Hello, I'm Tony,
I'm Patrick.
and welcome to Cape to the Cross Apologetics. We're working our way through J.P. Moreland's book, Scientism and Secularism, Learning to Respond to a Dangerous Ideology. And what is the dangerous ideology? Well, it's scientism, right? And we've looked at the chapter one already. We finished that, and scientism is the air we breathe, right? It's part of our modern day zeitgeist, is I think we can say, right? And now we're working our way through chapter two, and he asked the question, why scientism matters. And so we've been looking at a few things. Now, what he's doing is specifically focusing on why scientism matters for ethics and religion and Christianity, right? That's what he's trying to get at here. And he's trying to say the effects that scientism has on ethics and Christianity. And so we've been looking at a few of these issues that he has laid out here, and we've worked our way up now to number three. He says scientism has led to increasing hostility toward Christianity, and this one is pretty straightforward, right? If scientism is true, that is, if the only knowledge that we can have is as a result of science, right? The only knowledge is scientific knowledge. Then it follows that Christianity is outdated and bigoted superstition because it's claiming knowledge. But scientism says, no, it can't be knowledge. And so, it's outdated, right? So that's that. So scientism, he tells us, has led to increasing hostility toward Christianity. You can't make those claims because they're not scientific claims. And if you're claiming that you're right and you're not right and you're refusing to back down, then you're bigoted and it's just a bunch of superstition. Right? Well, that's the issue here.
Right.
Number four, he says scientism has derailed the church from making disciples and has made Christian parenting less effective. Now, what's going on here? Well, he says in every culture in which the church is present, God's people are to avoid particular manifestations of the world in that culture, right? So, John says we're to love not the world, right? And so we're to avoid various manifestations of what John there calls the world. This is the evil cultural makeup. However, he says, to do this, it's not enough just to know scripture. As Christians, we must also understand the system of thought, the world, right? Understand the practice and the value in our culture that are worldly and are able to make this clear to fellow Christians and explain how to refute those ungodly systems using both biblical and non-biblical evidence. So it's more than just knowing the scriptures. That was what he's suggesting here. But we also must know and be able to refute the world and its practices and its beliefs. And of course, if we don't do that, we're only doing part of the job.
Right. So don't you see the head that might come here if we're saying we have to be against the world, and the other side is bringing only the world. So
Yeah.
it's bound to happen. So we're going to have to face it truly head on. Well,
And
Christians,
what he's going to get at here is we have to be involved in apologetics. And of
right.
course, he's a philosopher Christian philosopher, and that's what you'd expect, right? At some point, this is going to have to.
He can make claims, allowed to make claims according to his purview. So yes.
Yeah.
Well, Christians must be taught not only what they believe, but why they ought to believe it. Ooh, yes. Not just the what, but the why. This will especially involve exposing and undermining scientism and dealing with issues relating to science and the Bible. Again, they're not divergent paths, although there are people on that side to maybe claim that the two twain should never meet. But at least for me in my house, we also have a belief that God has thought in such a way that science is possible as well.
That's right. God has spoken on the sea.
Right. Unfortunately, our failure to address scientism and related issues is causing young people to leave the church. And so he talks about a little bit about what they're leaving for there.
Yeah. And so, he tells us, so that's part of the issue here, right? We haven't addressed the culture he believes in the way that we should as Christians. Also, he says the very concept of faith has been redefined and has now replaced the reason. He says today, faith is choosing to believe something in the absence of evidence or reasons for the choice. Right. Yeah. So faith is believing without evidence. Mm-hmm. That's what he's suggesting the notion of faith is today.
Yeah. What little TV or movies talk slightly positively about faith, listen to their definition, and they say, well, all this science, all this wisdom, all this space adventure, where does that leave faith? Oh, faith is in between the answers. And it's like, well, that's just a nothing answer. That's Buddhism teaching of this the silence is deafening type deal.
Yeah.
And so we see this a culture, a worldly culture, trying to harken back to so long ago of about 25 years that need to pull out their own version of what they think faith is, and it's quite impressive to see them pretzel the straight line there.
Yeah. So faith is choosing today, anyway, choosing to believe something in the absence of evidence or reasons for the choice. He says, but faith used to be the idea of a confidence or trust based on what knows. So notice, faith used to be based on our knowledge. It used to be based on what, we had evidence to hold to. So faith used to mean a confidence or trust based on what we know, our knowledge. He says, given the current cultural definition, ubiquitous throughout the church, so it's even in the church, he says, we Christians have unintentionally played right into the hands of advocates of scientism. If faith is only, something is the absence of evidence, then that's exactly what they're saying. And so we are buying into what they're saying.
Right.
And so we have lost the meaning of faith as confidence or trust based on what I know, right? So I can trust, let's say, my wife, because I know her. I can have faith in her because I know her, right? As opposed to, absence of evidence or reasons as a definition of faith, right? And so there's a problem there that he's pointing out, that we have bought into this particular weak and definition of faith. He says, by thinking of faith in this way, we have tacitly implied that we believe in the tenets of Christianity, notice, without any evidence or reasons at all. And of course, we don't really believe that, or at least we shouldn't.
Yeah. This is Peter Boghossian, who wrote kind of that amazing book where he called for all religious people to be held in mental asylums until such a time when they stop believing their magic sky daddy. He talked about, people come up to me and say, well, do you have faith? Do you have faith in your wife? And he sidesteps the issue by saying, do I have faith in her to do what? And so he just makes a big case without answering the true trust area. Even Dawkins gets this question. He sidesteps it as well by redefining it, making a joke, and then not answering it. So this idea of faith being just this absence of evidence, if we continue to hold to this, of course, we're going to have people unhitch the track and go down another path and say, well, this person is offering more than just an absence of something. They're offering me true things. It might be the worst thing ever. It might be a degradation of women. It might be a way to make me feel good. It might be to feel knowledgeable in my life. But what is it that true Christian faith offers? And it's that relationship trust. It's a trust in something. Faith is in it. If not, it is blind faith, and you're just leaping. And once your thought person dies and you just are carried along by what they said in the past, if they are no more podcasts, if Joe Rogan shuts down his show and you're not able to hitch on to the next person, where does that leave you but hopping blindly into the darkness there?
Yeah, and actually those guys go a little further than this. They hold the notion, faith is the idea of believing what you know ain't so.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
In other words, it's whatever is against the evidence. That's what faith is. I'm believing against the evidence or against the reason, right? Not having reason or evidence, but going against it. So it's not the absence of evidence, it's the opposite of evidence. It's going against the evidence.
Right.
And of course, that's not what Christians hold to with regard to what faith is, right? It's a confidence or trust based on the evidence, based on what we do know, right? So I have faith in my wife to keep her word, right? And so I trust her to do what she said she was going to do, right? Why? Well, because I have evidence. She has done that in the past, and she tells me she loves me, and I trust her. I believe that she does. And so I'm going to have faith or trust right? And confidence that she's going to do what she says she's going to do.
Right.
And so God has given us promises. He's told us things about himself and what he's going to accomplish. And so I have faith and trust in that. Why? Absence of evidence? No, we have a whole book full of evidence. We call it the Bible. Right. And we have evidence in our own personal lives and what he's done for us. And so it's not the absence of evidence, it's based on the evidence. It's based on who God is and how he has revealed himself to us. And so faith means confidence or trust based on what we know and not the absence of evidence or reason.
That's one of the reasons we go to church, open up the books in front of us and read from it, because that's how we grow in our confide, our with confidence, our with faith.
Yeah.
And finally, he says, by failing to help parents furnish their children with reasons for believing Christianity, again, parents, not just pastors, but parents primarily, that's my own interjection there, especially reasons for rejecting scientism, the church has crippled Christian parenting. Training in apologetics is vital.
There it is. We knew it was coming. Right?
A little self-serving, but that's all right. He at least has stake in the game, so we're there. So training in apologetics is vital to perhaps all areas of Christian education and parenting. And again, maybe if you're picking up this episode and you're thinking, oh, the modus ponens or the a priori, the bunch of Latin terms that I don't know yet. First of all, you should be starting to know Latin. Second of all, there's a show that I could suggest that might help with reading good apologetics books called Cave of the Cross Apologetics. But third, apologetics is just being there to provide answers. That's all it's there for. And it's a command to not just the pastors, it's not to just the philosophers, but it's there as a call, just like the Great Commission is a call. There's no office of evangelist. There might be specific people who are evangelists, but just like how there's evangelists, the office of apologetic is full because it's full of everybody. There's no single office of pastor or elder. There is the office of being a believer, and with that comes the responsibility of providing an answer. Okay. Failing here increases the odds that when they leave their home, when children leave their home, our children will leave a Christianity. And it's something where we want to make certain that we're not creating false converts. So we use the analogy of just because you're sitting in the garage doesn't make you a car. Just being in the family of the Christian family doesn't make you a Christian. I think we harp on that well, but then we kick them out of the garage and they realize that there are other garages around town that they could park themselves into and be that. And so we want them to be their own person and embrace the faith in their own heart and to trust in God, because God doesn't have grandchildren. He only has children. And we want to call our sons and daughters, our grandsons, our granddaughters, our brothers and sisters in true faith. And so that should be the goal. And apologetics does help with that, because when they ask, why is this the case? Or as I always say, your children will never be more of a philosopher as when it's about 2 minutes past their bedtime and you're just trying to give hugs and kisses as you walk out the door, and you'll realize just how deep the conversation can go in the middle of the night. But it's our responsibility to offer those answers as well.
And so he tells us, like it or not, we can't just bury our heads in the sand regarding the power and persuasiveness of scientism in our culture. It will affect Christians negatively if the leaders of the church and parents are not equipped to recognize when scientism is being promoted in, a movie or television or elsewhere, and to know how to provide a reasoned response to it. We need to be able to do that. And so he says, before we see why scientism is false, he wants to step back and look at where it came from, right? And give us kind of an analysis of it. Now, he tells us a full analysis of the question where it came from would be, impossible in his book. This is a pretty short book. But he says we can at least look at one key venue for where these shifts took place, and that is in the American university. And so the next chapter, chapter 3, he's going to take a look at how scientism changed the universities. So we can just go ahead on and move into that chapter.
Right. So chapter 3 talks about how scientism changed the universities. And here he's again going to provide this history of change that occurred. Because again, remember who founded those universities? Who were the elites of the classical education, post normal education? It was the Christians. It was the Christians providing the universities, and then we mistakenly opened it up to everybody. And now we have government Pell Grants that even help those who can't afford it, because the government has also subsidized the increase in the tuitions as well. So we have it coming in both ends there. All right. Well, the ubiquity and the cultural authority of scientism can be discouragingly and coercive to faithful Christians who are seeking to follow Christ, as it immerses them in a pervasive secularism. So if you're just keep getting inundated with it, if you have kind of no answers for it, if you don't know where to seek out the answers, it seems like you're facing the behemoth, especially when you go to university and, all these doctored people are around you, all these people wanting to be doctors who, have shirken off the immortal coil of religion and are just there to give you the facts and nothing but the facts. Well, Dallas Willard, who taught philosophy at the University of Southern California from 1965 to 2013, he says about the American Academy, he wrote this: "The crushing weight of the secular outlook permeates or pressures every thought that we have today." Every thought. It's almost like they're taking every thought captive. I wonder if we could do that as well. Yeah. The powerful, though vague and unsubstantiated presumption is that something has been found out that renders a spiritual understanding of reality in the manner that Jesus is simply foolish to those who are in the know. And so once you learn the thing, then you realize, oh, what my poor parents raised me in, it's not only true, but it's now backwards. And, the joke for the intro to philosophy students is, you take one semester of philosophy and you automatically think you're a philosopher. The joke follows the intro to psychology and everything else too. Is you're suddenly a doctor who's diagnosing every personality on TV as a schizophrenic. And I mean, that might be true today, but that's at least was the joke at the time.
So he says things have not always been this way in the American universities, right? Where we have been kind of pressed into this particular area. He says in 1884, Harvard University changed its official seal to include two phrases: veritas, truth, and Christos elexica, for Christ and the church. So truth for Christ and the church is the idea here. Yeah. Julia Rubin, he tells us, who serves today as a professor of the university at Harvard there, explains the significance of this particular seal, this Veritas Christo Ex Lexica. He says that in 1884, Harvard's officials noticed that the two phrases on their new seal, truth and Christ and the church, were compatible things. They had inherited a worldview that strangely and strongly associated truth and religion. The term truth encompassed all correct knowledge. So what is all correct knowledge that they thought they had? What was true, right? Well, it included things like knowledge of religious doctrines, common sense beliefs, and scientific theories. And all these were judged by the same cognitive standards. So the truth then for them in 1884 included religious doctrines and common sense beliefs. He says this view represented the view of most of the educated Americans at this time.
Right. A time long ago.
Well, okay, 40 years ago.
Yeah. And we've been doing swimmingly ever since. There's been no downgrade in culture or theory of knowledge. We've only gotten better. Well, how things have changed. Well, Rubin details how from 1880 to 1930, the American Liberal Arts College became the modern research university. She distinguishes between three overlapping time periods: the religious stage from 1880 to 1910. That's probably about true. The scientific stage from 1900 to 1920, and the humanities and extracurricular stages, 1915 to 1930. And again, remember when we talk about history, there's usually not a thing that starts the thing, right, that we're talking about. And so that's why these kind of overlaps happen. And it's more of a smooth age or a smooth period, the rocky version, and then smooths out again and gets rocky again. So, and again, once we think that we're in the middle of true knowledge, we just have to look back at all the periods before us and go, they thought that too. So there's
Go
no
figure, right?
reason to sit
Yeah.
where we're at.
So she's going to start with this religious stage. And she says that during the religious stage, colleges consider themselves to have two mandates. First, imparting wisdom and knowledge while teaching the skills needed to discern each. So notice colleges believe that part of their requirement, right, was to impart wisdom and knowledge. And, and then skills. So it teaches you wisdom and knowledge, and then it teaches you how to do things so that you can make a living, right?
Right.
And then secondly, the second kind of mandate for college is developing students, notice, spiritually, morally, and politically so that they might serve God, the state, and the church as well. Well, we're a long ways from that.
Right. So I've been reading more about classical education, and I find myself once again cursing dead people like Rousseau, and realizing how just one individual can uproot the whole system. But this idea of not everybody needing college, but this specificity in a skill to do a particular job is what universities were kind of there for. They were there to kind of continue the education into a further degree of specific knowledge of kind of a less general sense. But the primary schools were there to develop that individual that knew how to take wherever they landed in whatever career and take up and go. And universities, we kind of have it backwards. Everyone must go to university, and once you get there, again, it's probably a little bit of a treaded on old ground. But the way that you have to kind of realize if you want to succeed at college is you almost have to teach yourself. Well, those were all skills that you were supposed to get in your primary schools that are no longer there. Your art was supposed to have been formed then, and then you get into the universities and you're like, wow, I have to teach myself how to learn things because they're not doing it for me anymore. And so it's pretty impressive how much has changed there, where the religious stage used to just be that imparting of knowledge, again, increasing, but then developing spiritual maturity even more so. Again, the universities were the places where, your pastors and your theologians went to school.
Yeah. And so, he tells us that many factors cause the approach to knowledge in the university curriculum to change. For example, developing technology for industry and defense meant that the sciences became increasingly specialized, right? So we moved away from this type of approach when we were going to school to developing technologies and industry and defense, right? And so sciences became increasingly specialized. And of course, over time, so that's one factor that caused change, the emphasis on why people were there, right? And then also there was we might call a philosophical, right, kind of change. He says over time, a fact value distinction came about according to which truth and facts, or in the sciences, empirical knowledge, notice, became the only knowledge. So only truth and facts, values were left out. Ethics was left out because they didn't bring knowledge. We only needed truth and facts. And so these are at least a couple of the factors he's mentioned here that brought about the change that we see here from the way it was in the beginning, right?
Yeah. So think about aviation, the atomic bomb, rocket science, right? Very specialized. Things that go boom, you want really specialized people to know what they're doing when they're handling those things. So it's probably a good idea to send them to a specialized school. And what's more specialized than the university? Well, then you have your hard sciences on one side, and then you have your alleged humanities on the other side. That's when the communists decide, wait, if we take over those things, we'll at least have a half of it, and then give it another 20, 30 years, and we can have the other side. And so that's what we're seeing these days. But that shift over into specialization, but then also that facts value distinction should be that twofold that's being talked about here. Well, religious and ethical claims were soon understood to be merely private feelings and personal opinions. Religion and values could not provide knowledge. In fact, they were neither true nor false. Again, a culture downstream from politics probably plays a part here. You think post World War II, you have the nature of impending doom of the Cold War. You have the hippie movement, free love, drug use coming into play, and that's kind of taking hold in the university as well. And what's there to contend to it? Well, you have the sciences, which doesn't talk anything about that. It can make the better drugs, right? But it can't provide you the claims. And so what's there to answer it? And if Christianity kind of gives over and says, well, that's the secular era, we need to have our own part. What will we expect if it doesn't come up against something to try and stop it?
Yeah.
That's where we find. Well, natural and revealed theology became a matter of faith. Those are for the churches, not for the universities, and it's definitely not for the politics now, and it's not for the real world, and it's not for when you go to the convenience store, and it's not for what to do in the courtroom, or how to make the best business deals, the most moral business deals. All that is just a matter of faith, and there's no reason for one to touch on the other, right? Nothing bad could possibly happen. Said famous last words.
That's right.
Knowledge of God and related matters were tolerated as long as their supporters did not claim to actually have knowledge. You can have those beliefs, but to say that you know that they're the case, or that hearken, other people are wrong for not having those beliefs, well, then you're outside the proper view of society at this time. Scientism won the day as the fact-value distinction prevailed. We have the hard sciences. We can titrate this. We can provide peer-based views. They can do the same experiments, produce the same results we can show you, and that's what gets you truth and nothing but the truth. So help you nobody. So
science, right? He says that there was a shift then from a unified curriculum grounded in God to a fragmented curriculum based only on the empirical sciences, right? So we left the notion of university, and we kind of fragmented the curriculum and chopped it up. Also, from a cognitive view where theological and ethical claims could be judged true or false, to a non-cognitivist or positivist view where such claims were neither true nor false, but simply either meaningless or perhaps mere expressions of feeling. Yeah. So we had this shift here, right? Away from curriculum grounded in God to science, and also away from a cognitivist view of theology and ethical claims, that is, that they were either true or false, right? To a non-cognitivist view that ethical and religious claims were neither true nor false, but were either meaningless or perhaps just expressions of our feelings, right? Mm-hmm. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the logical positivists kind of bought into this thing in the early 1900s, right? Where now ethical and moral claims were just expressions of our feelings, right? The notion of emotivism in ethics is what we're talking about here. It's just an expression of your emotions.
Right. Well, let's remember where the original purposes of college education were. The first purpose was to acquire knowledge and to acquire the skills to obtain knowledge. Again, more specific types of knowledge there. In a modified form, this purpose was retained. The new goal, though not aimed at discovering truth, was to facilitate useful research within a framework of changing truth. This is where you became even more the poor college student who was going to graduate school, and you were tasked as close to slave wages as you could possibly get, and in the hopes that your name could be addendumed to the research that breaks the new grounds of the new discovery. And then from there you get your doctorate, and then you can also have the slave wages underneath you as a university professor. No offense to any university professors out there. Well,
right.
maybe
or the slave laborers, the researchers.
Right. The second purpose was to develop the spiritually, morally, and politically virtuous graduates who could serve God, the state, and the church well. Again, those are all the paideia, the culture, the citizen, the responsibilities, the ethical virtues that you need to not just be the individual, but the individual who is part of the collective that serves others. Those could not be modified, but had to be done away with entirely. Why? Because we're talking about spirituality, morality, the politically virtuous. Good political? No, it just has to be, everything is political, and it's just your own personal version of that. But politically virtuous graduates that are being produced. Those are things, those three areas we have to wipe out, because again, we can't scratch test it. We can't break it down to its basic parts and build it back up again, see what makes it tick. If we can't do that, then no knowledge claim is able to be done there, because science doesn't deal with those types of knowledge claims. They'd even say, scientism would say they don't even exist. Right. And so they have to be done away with, because, well, that's just wasting our time. We're here to get man on the moon. And to shoot a man, 90 million miles away in 3 days on a thing that you light and hope it doesn't blow up. Well, to talk about, the humanities, well, no, we're trying to get a human to the moon, and we do that through physics and chemistry and mathematics. Even math is maybe a little bit too much into the hoity-toity, our numbers real category, but they're useful. So, and we can keep doing 2 + 2 = 4 until the cows come home, and we'll still get that. So those are the areas we need to concentrate on. Once we won the space race, well, then maybe we'll talk about it. And right. We've never talked about it since then.
And so he tells us that the responsibility for moral and religious development then became the sole burden of the humanities, but the humanity professors also had accepted non-cognitivist attitude of the non-empirical realms, right? They also held that ethics and morality and religion and that sort of thing were not truth, didn't contain any truth. And so they too were forced to negate these, and go over these waters, navigate these waters without any solid body of knowledge concerning values. And so the attempt then, he tells us, to teach character, notice, was inconsistent with the new founding values of the university: tolerance, academic freedom, a spirit of non-dogmatic ideas, and free inquiry. And so among humanity professors, a common vision of non-empirical knowledge disappeared. Mm-hmm. And all ethical and religious training was, he says, punted to extracurricular activities.
Right.
So that's where you were going to learn your, these non-empirical knowledge, which weren't knowledge at all, right? Ethics and religious training. We just move them over to extracurricular activities.
Right. So when we talk about good sexual health, the person that I want to learn it from is the football coach. So, what ought to do on a date? Well, he's going to put little X's and O's on a board and tell me how to sack, I guess. Well, universities hope then to develop students' characters by developing extracurricular structures to nurture their senses of community and spiritual moral values. The university's second goal, then, imparting moral and spiritual knowledge, became the muddled goal of developing a rich student life. Scientism filling the atmosphere meant morality became morale. The college experience revolved around athletic teams and school spirit. Again, it's almost upended some schools where you are a 4, maybe a 6-year general studies graduate because you can run a football really well.
Or at least watch a football game. Cheer.
Yeah, and that makes you a good citizen.
That's right.
And then we wonder why the idea of dads sitting around and painting their chest on every Sunday is viewed in the zeitgeist as a thing that happens.
That's right.
The second goal then dissolved. Like the likes of Plato, Aristotle, Moses, Solomon, and, of course, the man Jesus were soon replaced with fight songs and football games. And, of course, once you do that, once you replace Plato and Aristotle, Moses, Solomon, Jesus, and replace it with fight songs, right? We're not going to see the same type of quality or caliber of response, of students, of art. This degradation is, where else will it go? And then you're going to have to rely on you as the individual. And, you as the individual can do a lot. And, to pull from my backwards religious experience here of you are responsible for your own sin. You are responsible for your own moral character as well. But universities were there to help to encourage that, just as classical education in the primary schools and schools being both at home or, the one-room schoolhouse, were there to develop not just your mind, but you as the man or the woman to be the person you're going to be. Once those rock solid foundation or those avenues of teaching were done away with for just this kind of cultural rah-rah and specialization in science and only the sciences, what else would we expect in society? So I think Moreland is making great points here. And by great points, I mean ones that I definitely agree with and see.
Yeah. And so what is all of this taking us, right? And so he says, here then is the important lesson from our brief study. The shift from the ideas that there are several ways of knowing, right? There's spiritual knowledge and ethical knowledge and that sort of thing, values and so forth. And that theology, science, and other fields provide us with genuine knowledge to the acceptance of scientism and only scientism to give us knowledge. was not made on the basis of an argument, facts, or discovery that lay people just didn't know about yet. Rather, he tells us, it was merely a pragmatic sociological shift, right? And so he says, with this, then, this kind of all too brief tour of our cultural shift, followed by the roles of university in particular, what he wants to do now is he believes we're in a position to look at the actual arguments in favor of scientism and to see how these arguments, he tells us, fall flat. And so that's what our next chapter will consider, right? It'll look at scientism itself, and it'll talk about here's, how it's self-refuting. That's chapter 4. So that's what we'll see look at.
Right. So with the failure of the universities, with the failure of nothing able to capture it, I think current day, we're seeing maybe a return to the next generation, or maybe some of the thought leaders turning back and looking back at what came before and seeing when it worked and when it was available. And this is the opportunity that the church has. And instead of divorcing ourselves from the world completely as far as being included in the conversation, this is the opportunity to present the truth to a large number of people who they've tried the postmodernism, they've tried the Nietzscheism, they've looked at all that the world has had to offer, and the political outcomes that we see today are clearly evident. And so you're going to have the big names, the Trump-like people pop up, and not just Trump, but other people who are going to fill that vacuum and be cultural leaders. And this is the opportunity for the church not to be cringe and not to secede it over to a new pope or to Eastern Orthodoxy or the bizarre outpouring of liberal Christianity or mega churches, but this is the time to solidly present the faithful teachings of Jesus Christ as the absolute truth, the foundation of truth. And from there, we can reclaim those things that the universities taught, and we can be those thought leaders that are pointing back to the ultimate thought leader. So this presents a glorious opportunity, a redeeming opportunity. And so it's just one that the church has to realize that it's in the midst of, and hopefully we can be a part of that. So, and you can be a part of it as well by continuing to read this book, caveofthecross.com for all the past episodes. And you can check us out on YouTube and Rumble and Odyssey, Spotify, whatever else the world has to offer, we'll post on there as well. And you can check them out there. All right. So we'll head on to chapter 4 next time. And we say thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.